I'll never forget that night. Never. The night the Watcher stood by. It was Christmas Eve. Matt and I were already in bed, dreaming of the presents that would be waiting under the tree. Dreaming of how jolly old Saint Nick would be when he found the cookies and milk we had laid out for him. It was around 1 o'clock when we both woke up to a thud just outside our window. We weren't more than 6 and 4 years old, the both of us. We could never have prepared ourselves for what happened. Matt rubbed the sleep out of his eyes. "Do you think it's him, Robert?" "Who else could it be?" I asked rhetorically. "Come on, let's see if we can catch him." I walked towards the bedroom door. "You sure, Robert?" asked Matt, sitting up in bed. "Course I am. Come on." "Mommy says Santa won't give presents to kids who peek." There was another thud, then a shout, a crash, and a scream. Matt and I just looked at each other. Our hearts sank and our faces started to change from looks of wonder to looks of fear. Fear for our mother. It was her scream. I wish this next bit was a blur, like it would be in a book, but it wasn't. I remember what happened next very clearly. I threw the door open, yelled, "Stay here!" to Matt, and ran down the steps. I heard a man yell, "No, you didn't have to kill her!" I reached the last step and bolted around the corner. What I saw, no child should have had to see. Blood had been spattered over the cookies and the nettles of the Christmas tree. On the floor was my mother, blood pooling from a gash on her neck, her eyes glossy. Standing over her was some creature straight out of my nightmares. It was long and slender. Its arms reached to the ground, its body pitch black. The only two things on it that weren't were the horns on its head and the human face it was wearing as some sort of mask. I'll never forget that face, frozen in fear, forever. Across the room stood a man and a woman. The man was tall, dressed in a dark brown suit. He had spiky hair and wore a pair of black glasses. Next to him was a woman, maybe in her late 20s, early 30s. She was shorter than the man. Her hair was ginger. She was staring open-mouthed at the sight before her. I felt like I was going to be sick. Who were they? Why were they? What was that thing? Was my mother dead? The man turned and seemed to notice me for the first time. The thing snarled, and the man turned back to the woman. He shouted something at her. He must have told her to get me out of the room, because the next thing I knew, she was trying to drag me away. But I wouldn't move. Like that face on the creature's head, I was frozen, wide-eyed with fear for my mother and my life. The man took a silver thing out of his pocket, and an ear-piercing buzz emitted from it. The creature let out a high-pitched scream and jumped through the living room window. "Stay with him, Donna," he said. "I'll be back as soon as I can." And with that, the man was gone. The woman, Donna, walked over to me. "I'm sorry," was all she could say. I don't blame her. What else was there to say? I think I cried, although I felt so numb that I'm not sure if I actually did. I looked out the window and was vaguely aware of the fact that Matt had come down and was screaming at the top of his lungs. What was outside the window was what caught my attention. A man. Not the man who had chased off the monster, but a different one. He was a shadow on the white winter backdrop of the neighborhood. The only feature I was able to make out were his eyes. They locked with mine, and he just watched me. I closed my eyes. Now I knew I was crying. The fear had gotten to me. The pain of losing Mom hit me. I opened my eyes, and the Watcher was closer now. Still a shadow, but nonetheless closer. He startled me, and I fell on my back. I looked back up at the window, and he was gone. Soldiers were eventually on the scene. My mother was put into a body bag and taken away. Matt and I had shock blankets wrapped around us. The man had come back. A sort of black slime stained his hands and forehead. His eyes were dull, as if he had just committed some unthinkable crime. One of the soldiers gestured to us. The man nodded and walked over. "Hello," he said, a fake grin plastered across his face. "I'm the doctor." Neither of us responded. Donna walked up behind him. "Actually, Doctor, I think you'd better just leave it to me," she said. She took us to our Aunt Eileen's house. One of the soldiers must have found out who we were and contacted the nearest family member, and that was that. The funeral happened a few days later. We eventually got our gifts that were under the tree after the authorities had inspected them, and Aunt Eileen became our legal guardian. That was it. Some part of me expected my mom to come home one day, like in a fairy story. But real life isn't like those stories. The dead stay dead, and as I got older, that truth became harsher and harsher to deal with. I miss my mother. I can still hear her lullabies in my head to this day, and it hurts. I've come up with various explanations for what happened that night. Hallucination. Maybe aliens really did come down to the earth and kill my mother. In which case, that would explain the government's presence. But there's one question that still irks me and haunts me every night to this day, and it's the question that keeps me from letting go. Who was the man in my window? And why did he not step in? Why did he just stand by?